business, equity, and opportunities. Getting started.
So yeah, my name is Poirier, and first of all, I've been an entrepreneur, a TEDx speaker, an author for years now. So probably, I think I go back to age 19. I started my first business, which was a business publication, so a newspaper where I went around and interviewed entrepreneurs. That goes back to 1996. And so that's kind of where I started this journey. And then I went into the corporate world. I had actually moved across the country. I think I had $600 in my pocket. Moved across the country and then went into working in the corporate world, Fortune 500 company, and then a Global 1000 company. And then from there, I found my way back into entrepreneurship as a speaker. Also got obsessed with interviewing people. So for those that would know the book, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, he interviewed thousands of thought leaders. And I think I've even surpassed the number he was at solely because I became obsessed with trying to figure out what makes people tick and what allows them to get to the top 1%. Yeah, so the book's called The Enlightened Passenger. It's somewhat unique in different ways in the sense that it's a fictional parable. But it's still in the vein of maybe called self-help. But I often say in a lot of ways, it's like we're in self-help, but we're kind of, I don't want to use the word tricking, but pulling you into learning while you're just reading a story. But basically the premise is it's two strangers on a plane, an older stranger and a younger stranger. The older stranger's name is Treb, T-R-E-B. The younger one is Robert. And basically Robert is a arrogant, pretty sure business person, younger, who thinks I can do anything on my own. I don't need any help. He books actually the second seat beside him in first class, so he doesn't have to sit it by anybody. Falls asleep, wakes up, this older gentleman sitting beside him. He's surprised. The older gentleman introduces himself. Robert, the younger guy, doesn't really care to learn anything. He pretends he's going to go to sleep until he learns that the older guy has actually become rich. And he wants to know how he made his money. And ultimately, what he finds out is, yes, he was rich financially, but more importantly, he's rich as a person. And so the older guy, during the flight, through his life journey, teaches Robert a certain amount of lessons about how to live a fulfilling life. Yeah, so what I've said recently is no is the new yes. And what I mean by that is it may actually be more important to understand the power of no than the power of yes. So for me, just the quick backstory is I grew up in a small little town. My grandfather told me, say yes to everything. That's the way to get ahead in life. So that was ingrained into me. And then I started interviewing all these thought leaders. And by the way, I heard Richard Branson said this quote one time, say yes to everything and figure out how to do it later. So I'm like, this guy's running 200 businesses and he says yes to everything. My grandfather, who I admire so much, says yes to everything. And then I started interviewing these thought leaders and I noticed they were saying no. And not just no, they were saying no 20 to 50 times more than the average person. So then I got conflicted, like which is right? And so then I dug and found the Richard Branson quote, and it was actually paraphrased the first time I heard it. What it actually said is, say yes to everything that you love, and then figure out how to do it later. The that you love part is pretty important. And so then I started studying the no's from these thought leaders, and what I discovered is they were saying no to all the things that weren't aligned with what they wanted to do, or no to all things that wouldn't move the needle, so they could say yes to the few things that will move the needle. So I had to reprogram myself, and I feel the easiest way to do that is to start with smaller ones that are easier to say no to. I want to clarify, you also have to know what a no and a yes is in your work. In other words, don't say no to your boss because Corey said so. You know, you got to figure out, you still have to use common sense. You just can't say, nope, I'm not doing anything. I mean, you got to use common sense. But in that case, it might be, what are the no's and yeses within my job? And maybe even talk to your boss and say, here's what I'm trying a new practice on. Are you okay with me saying no to these type of things? And at least make them aware of it. But in either case, I believe if you can work on the muscle of saying no now, you're going to be much further ahead down the road, because this is an important thing I mention these days a lot, which is that everything you say yes to is truly a no to something else. So building wealth, I think, so for me, there's two sides to it. There's the building wealth for the sake of building wealth, meaning like what are the strategies around how to increase, if you're a business owner, your revenue and ideally your profit. There's that side. But then there's what I'll call the ways to create abundance, which might be a little bit more holistic. So this is going to sound really strange for some people, but I've studied this, and at least I can speak for my truth on it, is this word called synchronicity, which for most people, they might call it coincidence. What I would say, if you're going to call it coincidence, maybe describe some of them as meaningful coincidences. Like, what are the ones that you can place a meaning on? So this is going to sound strange, but I've built a lot of my business through leaning into these synchronicities. So when I say synchronicity, I mean something happens and you can decide, do I lean in on this or do I ignore this? And so for me, I've decided to lean in, and I've been fascinated by how much it's impacted my life. So those are some things I talk about in the book that might not be as traditional, if you will, but I will say, even what I mentioned earlier, the idea of saying no will help your business, because you're only saying yes then. You're being very discreet about what you say yes to, which is going to help your business because you're saying yes to the things that are the right things. And to give somebody a tip for how to do that, like how to decide to no or yes, what I did is I created a personal mission statement. Now that's for me and the business, and every company pretty much that's thriving has a mission statement, whether the employees know or not. So what I did was I wrote my own, which is to be the guy who motivates, donates, educates, inspires, and entertains. And so how that relates to my no and yes is if somebody asks me to take something on, I look at those. How many of those is it? If it's 4, it's the easiest yes I'll say without regret. If it's 0 or 1, it's the easiest no I'll say without regret. So that's another way that I started increasing business from maybe you want to call it an organic point of view. So hopefully those are some okay strategies for how people can do it, even if they're not your traditional, again, invest in this or do this.